Mainly, Pete and I just were thinking that we would love to have a conversation with interested parties about what they're thinking about in terms of VEX. Um, Red Hat's doing it, and I feel strong. I'm Lisa from Microsoft. Um, I feel very strongly that we need to be in sync as an industry and do it the same. And we need to work with the scanning vendors so that they can read it. We need to, if Qualys is reading Red Hat's VEX files, I don't want them to have to develop a whole new plugin to read Microsoft VEX files. But the fact is, VEX is still emerging and nobody really owns it yet. So we need, as an industry, to make sure that somebody does own it and that we're kind of doing it the same way. Because I believe, and I'll let Pete weigh in a second, that VEX can make a significant difference in the future if we implement it well. And so it's going to take us to talk and keep communicating in order to implement it well. And so that's why I feel very strongly that as an industry we need to work together to do it together.
So there's two parts to that. One is how we all produce that information. And having a common way of doing VEX is very, very important. Because without that, well, who's going to listen? And it's about adoption. The second part of that is we have to have a way for the consumer, enterprise level, to understand what is that data and what does it mean to them. And unfortunately, for a long period of time, we've also looked at a vulnerability is a risk. And vulnerabilities contribute to what risk is. But somewhere along that journey, it got lost to the end user. So how do we inform them? And this comes to the second part of the equation, which is this vendor scanners being able to take that information in from all of us producers in a way that is common and easy for them. Otherwise, what are we giving away of data? And I'm going to give an example today. I was talking to, quote, a customer. And as I was talking to this, it's one of those major sectors. And I'm talking to a contracting officer. You know, if you ever had a chance to do one of those vendor things where you talk to a contracting officer, they're usually filling in a series of blanks. And what happened on CVSS and what the ratings were. And I said, we don't rate that way. We rate with a severity scale. He goes, oh, and I'm trying to get as quote close to the quote as the customer stated. We're getting a lot of pushback from vendors about CVSS because the base score is being overrun with environmental inputs. And so it doesn't work very well. And I'm going like, I usually have to explain this in great detail over 10 minutes to get the other side to kind of say, maybe. But the fact that customers are picking up on that means that we have a problem in the industry. And when I say the industry, I don't mean just the producers. It's the aggregators. It is the vendor scanners. So where do we draw that ability to transmit that information and stop, well, internecine warfare, for lack of a better term, where he said, she said, and they said. It was bad with two. You get three parties in there, and we all know everyone's quotes back to MVD, so I'm just going to call it because that's an aggregator. And unfortunately, the customer segment is lost on that. They look at it as an authoritative source. And that's why we need to have this conversation.
Did we jump in ahead of, does everybody know what we're talking about? Everybody understands VEX and how we get there? Is that right? Okay, good. I was hoping we just didn't dive into the deep end and catch everybody off guard.
It's unfortunately in our business, you assume everyone is on the same level you are. And that's not necessarily always the case. So the first comment we're asking is, as producers, and I'm going to assume who's not a producer here? We have any scanning vendors here? What's that? Consumer. Okay, consumers is just as important. Thank you, because that was my next question. Because those are three major things. I was talking to an attendee earlier today, and we're trying to describe what that problem set looks like. And there's producers, and you can have researchers and all that who are sub-almost kicking in. You have scanning vendors, which are used more or less as a translator of the problem set. And then you have consumers. When I say that, I'm talking about enterprise level consumers. Okay, just there's no lost translation there, because you look at producers and consumers are in the NTIA SBOM stuff. So I'm trying to follow a little bit of convention. So if those three groups are out of line, and then you have this thing over to the side, which is an aggregator, which everyone is pointing to, and CVE is a cornerstone of at least identifying, then we have to figure out what our data flow is. And what does that mean? For a large part of us, the question is, did you give me a complete record? Can you tell me to what level the problem is and how come you see it that way? And can you give me state? And this is an important part, because for years, everyone used to use a web page, right? And then when things change, you produce something, you send an email. How are we doing it now? Come to my website, go to MVD's website, go to CVE's website. And I think we could actually transmit that quicker and more complete. Did you want anything? Add anything?
So who out there is working on a VEX solution for either right now, which I know Red Hat is, or in the future?
So let me ask you all a question. You raise your hand of in the future, what is the inhibitor for you to get there? And Christina, since you're closest to that mic.
Do you mean on the ingestion side or the production side?
Production.
Okay, so yes, we are planning to produce VEX documents for customers. There's not really any inhibition right now, and I wish David and Jonathan were in the room because they are actually hands-on. I think the biggest blocker is probably knowing the standards, being educated on the standards, and having the right CVE data, having all the fields filled in, like making sure you have all the metadata.
Okay, so that's as a producer.
Right.
Okay, but you actually opened the second question as an ingest.
Right. Ingesting VEX. Wow. That's a can of worms that we have not really touched yet. We ingest SPDX SBOMs, and that's fairly straightforward, but ingesting VEX is a whole nother can of worms we have not touched yet.
I want you to note something. Cisco's ingesting SBOMs, which I think is a rarity. When I talk to customers, I've only seen one who ingested the SBOM and actually used it for vuln management. The rest were two. Okay, I'll count Cisco. That's three now. The rest were check to block compliance. Okay. Could you pass over to John in the red T-shirt there? What's inhibiting, or what are you producing? Are you ingesting, or you're waiting for something?
We're waiting on the data. We're waiting on the structured data to be able to actually do it.
Okay. And what would you look for as that structured data?
Pass that to Megazone.
Give it to the geek. So yeah, it's mostly internally. It's hurting the cats, getting all the data together. I mean, we're the CERT. We handle mostly our first party vulnerabilities, but we want to be able to feed first and third party. We have a lot of third party code in our products. And so being able to produce that VEX feed right now there are internal efforts to get that together, but it's getting all the different production groups, all the different product groups to provide that data in a consistent format that we can then put into a VEX document. And so there's a lot of education going on, what is VEX? What do we need from you? What structured data do we need and all this stuff? So it's a lot of internal education right now, I think, is our biggest hurdle, is just getting everybody educated and understanding why we are doing this and why it's not just some fun project we want to do.
So I'm going to ask you a couple questions, if you don't mind, Megazone. When you talk across all those groups and you're trying to find out what they have, is that a manifest challenge? Meaning you're trying to gather that information about what's there for your SBOM? Or is it a different challenge?
A little of both. SBOMs, we actually have SBOMs now for most of our stuff. There are a couple of teams that are lagging. Everyone's supposed to have the SBOMs ready, whether or not they actually do. A lot of the teams do at this point. That effort has been largely completed. We've been working on that already. But it's like getting the individual, because the SBOM is fine, but it's also evaluating. Let's just pick on like OpenSSL, right? We have OpenSSL, we use it in our product. They publish a CVE, but we have to reevaluate it for our use of that and not just echo whatever OpenSSL published. So if we were going to publish VEX documents for our products, we need that analysis done for every third-party package. I mean, are we affected by this? Are we not affected by this? So we can publish information to our customers that reflects our use of things.
So you said a couple things I thought were telling and interesting, and we'll use OpenSSL as our vehicle for discussion. Okay. What I heard was that there's an upstream that comes in, OpenSSL in this case, and they have a CVE assigned. The question is how it affects you. Okay. And then I would assume that the question is, how do you inform the customer about that? And I know you write your own advisory, so
Yeah.
you probably already write that.
Right.
The question is, how can you automate the delivery?
Right.
Okay. So we don't have any security vendors in here, right? Because a question I would ask them is, how do you get it? And we talked to a lot of security vendors, so I'll just kind of proffer what they've told us. Number one source, NVD. Most of them say about 90% of their data is NVD. Number two, OSVDB. Number three, a sundry others. Number four, their evaluation. Anyone have a problem with that? How about as a customer? Jennifer? Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on to read it right. Does that work for you?
I do 100% follow what you were saying.
Okay, so I'm gonna let Martin do it.
No, so for us, of course, all the public sources, they are not enough. They are very incomplete, and we rely on commercial feeds, that we combine all commercial feeds together, because one provides this, one provides that, and that's the only way how we get the complete information what we need.
Okay, so a lot of different feeds. So you're relying on
and many of them commercial feeds, not the one that are public.
but you're relying to do that yourself, or the security vendor to do that for you?
So we have, well, if we call commercial feed a security vendor.
Okay, that's why I want to make sure. Okay, Christina.
I am okay if they open source their security advisories, like GitHub security advisories. Great. Or if, SIFT wants to open source adding metadata to NVD records. I am very much not cool with a closed source like Black Duck security advisories, right? Why are they adding all this metadata that's all behind a paywall? Yeah, so you have to pay to get access to their security advisories that, only they know about, and they're not going to tell anyone. It's secret sauce.
So I just wanted to spend a couple minutes talking about our experience. My colleague Wiewek and I have been working on this for over a year, and we have decided to go with VEX inside of CSAF, right? So we spent a lot of time developing a publishing tool that would take our first party CVE information and publish it in CSAF files. And we started publishing those in November. And then we did that on the way to VEX, right? Because we want to publish VEX inside of CSAF. And it's a much bigger thing when you're talking about all the third-party vulnerabilities that are in all the open source that it is in every Microsoft product. But the fact is that engineering teams are dealing with this issue. They are aware that we have tools that make them aware of third-party CVEs, and they are asked to think about it, and they think about it and they adjust to it in one way or another. It's just not formalized. It's not like we're not doing anything about it. We are aware that using open source is difficult and challenging and scary and dangerous potentially. So we have thought about it, we just haven't formalized it. And so the trick is going to be to formalize it through a VEX attestation that we can publicly, publish. And so we've decided to start very small with one product and one team that's already dealing with this in a very formal way, our Azure Linux distro. We're already publishing all the third-party CVEs that go into that Azure Linux distro. We're just not doing it through VEX. So that data, I think they still do an OVAL file, but they're also publishing it through the Security Update Guide API. But they're not doing a very good job of it. And so we're working with that team to formalize that and publish VEX statements. So we have our security.txt file, which is going right now points to our CSAF directory. It will point to a VEX directory, which is parallel, just like Red Hat's doing. And potentially we'll have a VEX file for every one of the 250,000 CVEs where, in this case, Azure Linux plugs in their attestations, which right now are mostly fixed, not affected, right? Because so far we've only been doing fixed because we don't talk about the not affected ones, but that's the next step for those guys to talk about those that are not affected, so you can attest. So the red flags from a scanning vendor will go away. And then the trick is to get to the rest of the company, the rest of Microsoft. And so we're working with there is a build system that everybody's supposed to use. Of course, Windows and Office don't use it, but a lot of the engineering teams do use it. So we're going to try to link in an attestation tool at that level. So it's going to be a barrier to the build, right? So they're going to have to do some work and make the attestment to either it's not affected and tell me why, or it is affected and here's the fix. And so it's a long process, and it's gonna take much more time for us to do that. But we're sort of crawl, walk, run. We're pre-crawl at this point, right? But we have got the CSAF files out there. So that's kind of how we're going about it. But I'd be interested to see if others are thinking about CSAF VEX or Open VEX or something else.
I also want to hear from another customer segment, thoughts on that.
So I think we moved on to a different topic, but I think your question was if we as customers, if we're happy with security vendors providing their own evaluation, and it's not ideal, right? But we use several security scanners, and they have their own methodologies, right? And all of them use NVD, right? But some of them take NVD CVSS score, right? For example, if NVD score is present, they take it. If NVD is not present, then they will take CNA score. If neither is present, they will evaluate themselves, but they will provide the CVSS vector. Based on my experience with certain vendors, there are vendors I can trust because over many years I kind of see where they're going with their analysis and I can trust them. There are vendors who will provide the severity if if neither NVD or CNA scores are present, they will provide the severity, but not the CVSS vector, right? And that's these cases, it's really hard to trust them because how did they come to this conclusion, right? So it depends. Ideally, of course, there would be a complete system that's centralized that all the security vendors could use that we could rely on, but that's not the case. So we're just dealing with the realities.
So what I heard is that you use a security vendor. They normally pull from NVD or another source like that. When not, they go to the originator, I'll call the CNA. And then your question is, do you trust? And trust was a very big comment in the middle of that. And I think therein lies a challenge for us about VEX is we have to make sure that we have a standard way of approaching it and a delivery system that actually informs. In some ways, it's how do we become more, as producers, open about what it is that's affecting us. Now, we have different timelines, okay? Microsoft and Red Hat do it differently about our CVE announcements. But when you do get that information, it's knowing what that state is across that portfolio that you're looking for, and then that's a matter of how you can trust it. So there's a timing issue and there's a trust issue that's involved in that. I was going to try to get one of my guys to talk on this. I think he kind of punted back to me.
Well, Pete, we actually have a comment online. If
Oh, go
I
ahead.
can read that. So it says, our biggest challenge is resources, always. Our second biggest challenge is producing VEX is distribution. The expectation is that some end customers, governments will call VEX attesting that we're aware of essentially all CVEs, including all the CVEs that we're not vulnerable to, for all versions of all products within hours of it appearing. What do you think about that?
Unfair advantage for me. Okay. Number one, I pushed real hard that we'd publish unaffected CVEs. We took a while to get to that point, and we're doing it now. We're going back on the entire corpus, which is not a simple, easy thing. You want to find out how your web team really, your web portal team thinks of you, try pushing a lot of data. So we did that. The challenge for most of it is going to be when we do find it's affecting us because of some future issue, do we need to bring it back? That's a process problem for us internally. I forgot the rest of the question. What was the rest of the question?
Context.
Yeah, so let's call it for what it is. We have a data challenge here. And when you have the data, it's a matter of how do you convey it in a way that's useful. The customer doesn't want to waste time researching that issue in great detail. They're looking for, am I affected or not? What's my current state? And it's something that I think technology's driven us to the point that they're looking for an answer fairly quick. And they're accepting that the answer can change, you know, and so how do you deliver that? And it comes down to an automation part. I think the challenge we're going to run into is people being able to read it on their own. And to be honest about it, I think we need to get some robust VEX readers out there that we all have contributed to. Because once we do that, we can go forward. Now, I say that robust because my boss has actually written one and he's sitting in the back, so I have to acknowledge that. And we can give you the link for that. But how do we make it robust so that a customer, a security vendor can take on a lot of VEX and then appropriately search it? And that's something that we have to kind of look at collectively. Could Red Hat do it? Well, my boss wanted to dedicate more time and assets. He probably could get us to do it. But is this really a community problem is what we would rather look at. Because behind all this, for those of us who produce, we have a different problem of how do we gather this information and tool it so we can actually deliver it. And I think that should be more open sourced and looked at so we can deliver like. It's the like part that is going to make it work. Go ahead, Megazone.
I'm going to lob a softball at you because I know we had this conversation on the sidelines already. The problem with VEX is there is no such thing as VEX. There are a lot of things that are all called VEX. We have OpenVEX and CSAF and several other formats. And so like you said, like robot readers and such, you know, I know we're looking at doing CSAF, as I know Microsoft and Red Hat are both doing CSAF VEX. But I think part of the industry problem right now with VEX is there is this too many standards to choose from. And so you create a reader, is that reader going to parse every possible VEX format? Or are we going to try to push people to do, you know, all agree on a 1, maybe 2 or something?
It's a good question. I don't think we can do all because all is infinite. Do we do the 1 or 2? You know, you got to start with something, but how far do we want to go? I'll leave that as an open question. You're exactly right in that Martin, my team is, when I mentioned it to him, he says, it's not a standard. It's, what was your word? Nebulous? It's a concept. So I think the CSAF format, and he will correct me. Not he may, he will. The CSAF puts some frame to it to deliver on that concept. The concept is, can we talk about the exploitability or the effectiveness of a CVE? Thomas.
Yeah, when I heard this, kind of basically it falls down for me for kind of not only the common language and the common VEX standard, but for me it's also the ADP discussion on how kind of we basically contribute to that same data source. Because the much that I like that federated approach and the much that I like CSAF and us having the possibility to basically upload those files to a web server, parts of the session is also how do we ingest that into the vulnerability vendors' data sources. And they will not read thousands of data sources. So from my perspective, it's then even an integration of how do we integrate, no, how do you as a CVE board integrate VEX into the ADP part of the CVE thing. So basically from my perspective, that all connects somehow together. And then basically even also the tooling that we create to consume the data or provide and consume the data.
Before I screw it up, I'm giving a guy an action.
I think the CVE v5 schema already kind of supports VEX. You can identify components, you can identify ranges, you can tell which ones are vulnerable, which ones aren't, and that's VEX, right? The only thing that is missing is the justifications, right? That's the like special sauce in VEX, is that for every statement that says not affected, you have to specify why it's not affected, and it gives you like one of those 5 stock statements, right? Like inline mitigations or component not present, right?
Yeah.
That's the only part that's missing from CVE v5.
Yeah, but
So-
Martin, I don't quite understand you in this aspect, because me as a CNA can't put anything into a third-party CVE record in JSON5.
But you
So-
should be able to through ADPs, right?
You should be able to. Okay, so you're suggesting that we solve VEX with CVE using ADPs.
Yeah. Why not? Every CNA should become an ADP, and then like if OpenSSL acting as a CNA releases a CVE and shows the effectiveness of upstream OpenSSL, there should be 5 ADP containers: 1 from Fedora, 1 from RHEL, 1 from Debian, 1 from Ubuntu, 1 from Azure Linux, claiming the effectiveness of their downstream OpenSSL, however it's distributed, RPM in Fedora, RPM in RHEL, Debian package in Debian, right? And each have their own statement, am I affected or not? Because it could be that they're not, right? Because of the way they package the OpenSSL upstream code.
Interesting.
And yeah, most of you know what I think about VEX, but this allows me to basically add also specific scenarios, so component specific CVSS to that. So basically to the question of which standard do we use, we already have it here.
Yeah,
Thank
you don't need a standard technically, right?
I was just going to say, I've mentioned this to Pete, so he's chuckling because he already knows. CVE.org should be the single source of truth, and any vendor of a piece of software should be able to push vulnerability information to CVE.org. CVE.org does not rate any vulnerabilities, no severity rating, no CVSS score, completely agnostic. It's a container for every single vendor that ships a piece of whatever, OpenSSL as an example. You're going to have 100 different CVSS scores, severity ratings, et cetera, by vendor, by product on that one page. And every single scanner just has to go one place to get everything for everything that they're scanning for. Done. Solved. We don't have to consume from 1,000 different vendors. You go to one place, you get it all. The responsibility is on the vendor to push there. It just has to be that platform that disseminates that information in a completely vendor agnostic way.
And maybe just a comment on that one. So from a data perspective, I like that, but kind of with that comes also great responsibilities on kind of searchability, kind of which product, which CV. And I think the data structures that currently are used and kind of the distribution methods with Git and all that are definitely not ready to have that. So basically the tool development and kind of how those things are modeled, and basically maybe we also need a database and all that behind. So that's a lot of work. I'm not here to say like, I want that now. So I want that now, yes, but I'm seeing that it's hard work for us as the community to actually make it happen.
Thank you for that community word, because that's what I'm looking for.
I just want to make an aside about that. I love that idea. That's great. You do have a slight bit of a funding problem. So our SBOM management platform is already 200 gigabytes, and that's just for components and CVEs. And we're just Cisco. You're talking about a database that's upwards of 2 terabytes or more. You're boiling the ocean. You really are. All connections between all software ever. It's like a pie in the sky idea. I love it, but
the short answer is yes. But imagine a world where funding that went to a number of different, and this might get me in trouble, different places, such as the NVD, such as what ENISA is planning to create. Like money is being poured into all of these competing alternative solutions that will continue to keep this ecosystem fragmented. If we could all collectively get our heads into the game and actually fund this thing, whether it's governments, vendors, et cetera, set up CVE.org as a properly funded foundation to run this thing properly and solve the problem once and for all. I have no idea what that looks like. I have no idea what it's going to take, but I think anything short of that is just perpetuating the problem. In 10 years, we'll be back here again going, what's the next solution? Because all the stuff we've been doing for the last 10 years isn't working, because all the stuff we've been doing for the last 10 years isn't working.
Wow. How do you follow that one up? Because first of all, the last 4 commenters were well-versed in the problem and where is the challenge. So the question I would turn to is, for those who aren't a producer, what do you think? I see a nod, a thumbs up. Okay. How about for you guys? Yeah. I'm sure you don't know my English very well, but yes. Do you like the approach? You would? Okay, so the spreading of the information around dozens of places is your nightmare, and you're looking for how can you collate it? And I would assume that that whole question would be, can I look at it the same way so I can compare one item to the next? Okay, so I think that kind of says the problem statement. The question what I'm hearing is, if we were to collectively work at that, we're all willing to take a bite at that apple to help chew on it, I guess. Go ahead, Thomas.
To add on that, kind of looking at our internal numbers on how many internal vulnerability notifications we send to product teams and get those respective answers. That is a high load amount. You already said that from the data source, but also kind of from a security scanner point of view, kind of it's also very hard to find the right piece of information to show it to the customer in that right scenario for that asset. So just having the data available is, from my perspective, only the very, very small part of solving the problem. But for kind of the asset scanning and all those SCA or whatever tools to find the correct spot of the data that you need to show to our mutual customers will be, I think, the bigger part of the problem.
So as you were talking, the one thing that struck me that I haven't thought to, maybe you have, feedback. There has to be a way for quick feedback because the item was about trust. And if we can't do the trust aspect without some feedback, there has to be a way to say, I think this isn't right. And more importantly, it has to come from those who are upstream of us and those who are researching and reporting, who are going to be the primary feedback mechanisms. Or I think the system won't work just because of its weight.
Isn't that what Twitter X is for? We get all sorts of feedback from them.
Just don't read it. It doesn't matter. Go ahead.
So, of course, if all the data is somewhere in a centralized location, that's great. But I think I would prefer to get it from a security scanner, and it's because we'd like to get not only the VEX data but CV data, the threat intel. So when it's all aggregated in a single source, like a security scanner, that would be my preference.
So I don't think we're cutting that out. We're just being able to standardize the way we deliver, be more complete in that record set. That makes it easier for that, I'll call it user interface now, to parse it to your needs, which then would hopefully, I would assume as a security vendor, is that they would be able to parse it down to your specific needs by product, application, and version. Go ahead, Martin.
I was just going to say, scanners already ingest data from vendors, right? So they already take this information from the NVD, from CVE, and then add information from vendors because they need that information too. So it doesn't actually change the quality of the data that the scanners produce in any way. The scanners still need the information from the vendors, right? So having it centralized doesn't change that.
Well,
quality.
The question is the source of the data.
If it's still the vendors are pushing the data to the central database.
Okay, so I'm going to push the envelope here. I would say that the data that's being fed out of NVD does not match what I, as a vendor, saying is affected. So if we're
Not
all
NVD.
yeah. So I'm not looking at NVD to transform that data into something it's not, because they're doing it from a general perspective that could affect everything. And I think that's the challenge, that they've bit off more than they can chew on that. They're not being malicious. There's just 40,000 CVEs, 40,000 CVEs. How do you eat that when you have a limited budget and you are not expert in the software that it's running on?
Yeah, I was just trying to address the customer's perspective that they trust the scanner's data. I understand that, but I'm saying the scanner already uses the vendor's data anyway, because they have to take the vendor's data.
I think a couple people want to challenge that. Okay.
To an extent.
Yeah, they absolutely do not. We've been fighting with scanner vendors. They simply do not get information from us, period. Any of our data.
Shouldn't they?
They should. They do not. So that's the problem. That's one of the things this would help solve, is that we've been fighting to try to get scanner vendors, because we get so many false positives, because they just look and say, you're running package X version Y, you're vulnerable. But we're not. And we publish security articles that show why we're not. But we get laundry lists from our customers because they run a scanner. Then they send the whole scanner report to us saying, explain in detail every one of these CVEs. And then we go, we're not vulnerable, we're not vulnerable, we're not vulnerable, we're not vulnerable. We're not like, and this is a big problem. It's not just us. I've had several conversations here with other vendors running the very same issue, that because they're only pulling, like they said at the start, the majority of the data comes from NVD. They're simply looking at things like package and version and not considering what it's running on. And that's why I'd love to have a centralized feed that we could get because going to the scanner vendors and saying, pull every one of the vendors' CSAF files into your scanner, that's probably going to be a difficult thing to do. But if we had a central pull this one data feed that has all the vendor information in it, that's not a big problem. But I think we could get scanner vendors to do that.
Can I answer that question too? I'm going to start with Sift and Gripe because they're open source. They only have 22 feeds, no vendor data, nothing, 22 feeds. And most of that is the package manager stuff and NVD and a couple other sources and all of the other vendors I have talked to, they're not going to, there's thousands of vendors out there. They can't go to everyone's website and pull that data. They're just pulling from the main feeds that are machine readable. And that's been my experience every time I talk to a vendor about them. If there was one source, they would go to that. And they don't have the money to hire 100 security researchers, right? That would cost them too much money. And that's what it would take to manually pull all of that data together and score it. It's just too much money to not be centralized, and it should be centralized. And on top of that, I didn't buy the SCA tool to make that determination. I just bought it to find what's in my software, right? They should not be in charge of scoring and hiding, the vulnerability information behind a paywall. That should not be their purview. I just want them to scan my software and tell me what's in it.
I would even add that on top of that, when you were saying, yeah, the scanning solutions they have, we don't cover all vulnerabilities with the scanners. It's impossible. We were doing some in research last year because we did present it. 50% of the high and critical vulnerabilities, they don't have a signature. I cannot rely on the scans to be secure and patch everything. I need to have the source of those informations, and then we need to have it in a way that it's easy for us to automatize things. Because if you have 10 vulnerabilities, it's fine. If you see the amount of vulnerabilities we have every day, we cannot be reading something that it's nice for a person, but you cannot put it in a system that will automatically create everything. So I think it's important that we have a place where we can get everything. We don't have to go to thousands of places. We miss half of it, or we have to pay someone else to do that job, because at the end, it's information that we really need it. And that's what I was saying. In our case, we don't rely on scans. We do scans, but scans come, I don't know, maybe 2 days after, 3 days after. So it's more about, okay, I already notify, you already started the patching. I can validate that the patch was correctly deployed because I have a scan. But relying only on that, you are missing a lot of things.
So 2 comments on what you said. First, we as a vendor are also running our infrastructure, and it's kind of a pain to get our vulnerabilities into our infrastructure, because basically the scanners are all open source vulnerabilities like MENT, like OSV, and we cannot get our information into that systems because we're not open source. So that's a big problem. And the second, maybe more fundamental question that I would want to ask, we're discussing about this SBOM and relationship scanning, and basically coming up with an SBOM is really a pain. And we need to have a verification that the SBOM that we came up with is correct. So I see definitely a point where scanning makes sense. But at the phase of vulnerability assessment, when we start scanning, we're basically lost. So from that perspective, I really would ask, how can we enable, and yes, my employer is also not, so, okay. How do we enable the asset management systems that basically people don't need to scan what they have, but basically be able to catalog what they have? And
that's actually, well, let's put it as a second point of order. You could actually put SBOMs as another point of order in there. I'm not sure which the order is. But I know I don't want to eat all those elephants at once, because that's a herd. But the point is correct, because it for those who are associated with the U.S. federal government, they had the continuous diagnostic and mitigation program. Okay, I mean, this is 10 years ago or so, Okay, it's, yeah, I know it's still there, but phase one, what was phase one about? Okay, software asset management, hardware asset management, configuration management, vulnerability management. We're talking about the same thing to Vince's point. 10 years later, it's still not solved. And I think because we went into this, well, without knowing what we know now, okay, put it that way. And it's just a matter of how do we leap forward? Because this is, I'll put it as a shared responsibility. Okay, as a CNA, you're responsible for your scope. Let's just use that knowledge to help everyone else along. Okay, not saying there's not a validation. Not saying there's not a level of trust as you move up on CNAs. I think those are all part of that process to get to the end goal. But technology-wise, I don't think this is impossible. It just takes a lot of effort collectively, because if we do it separately, we're going to be too dispersed and no one's going to pay attention to it. And at the end of the day, we're looking at how do you get everyone that's consuming this, whether they're a security vendor, they're a government agency, or they're a consumer enterprise, to take it. Not have to do loads of extra work. The question I have for you all is, are we willing? Yeah. Is it necessary? Okay. And Chris, I know you've been listening, so you can always comment. So yeah, I look at, you know, NVD took on a really big problem set, and it just is too big. So join forces. That's the real point. Well, I'm not going to end on a high note. I'm going to let Lisa end this on a high note.
I think it's worth the work to try to move this ball forward, and we're never all going to agree, but we can all take baby steps and try to get there. So, but I think it's worth it. It's very hard.
Extremely hard. So, couple people have approached me about some of this, okay, in various aspects. So if you're willing, okay, God, I'm about to do something fatal. If your organization is willing, I don't need 20 emails from every organization, but you can send me an email. So PALLOR@redhat.com. Okay, I was going to use .net, but it goes into a hole, and then my boss asked me, "Did you get any answers?" So send it to me, and I'll put you into a mailing list that we can start figuring out what are steps. You know, what is our proposal? How do we go about it? And see if we can get some momentum here, and compare that with other groups. And I think you're going to, in the closing, you hear elements of this, because I don't think this is the only area that we should be collaborating on. We need to collaborate across this entire space, because you hear governments, you hear large critical infrastructures, and you hear the mid-sized and small-sized business screaming for help. You know, we got to work that out. So if you're willing, I'd like to hear from you. Don't make me go look up your email. Otherwise, I'll have to send you a note and say, you nodded your head. Okay. Any last comments from anyone? Okay. I'm beating the hook. Valerie?
I am impressed. Pete never ends early, but I think this is warranted. So let's give him a round of applause, and Lisa as well.